What if I told you that the story of Jesus as you know it is incomplete? That the figure so often portrayed as solitary, distant, and almost untouchable was, in truth, surrounded by a hidden network, a spiritual family carefully prepared over centuries, deliberately erased from history? Imagine for a moment what it would mean if Jesus's life was not an isolated miracle, but the culmination of a vast plan involving generations of souls, relatives, and communities working together for a purpose greater than themselves. Has this ever crossed your mind? What you're about to discover might surprise you, because the revelations of Edgar Cayce, one of the most mysterious clairvoyants of the 20th century, challenge everything you've heard in churches and sacred books. But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from across the globe, and together we can map this current of light and reflection. In the early 1900s, when spiritualism and mysticism intrigued the modern world, Edgar Cayce unveiled messages that even today resonate like thunderclaps against the walls of tradition. Among his visions was a century-old secret. Jesus was not an isolated figure, but part of a broad, intentional network of spiritual and familial connections. Cayce described a divine plan stretching far beyond the manger of Bethlehem, one that spanned incarnations, bloodlines, and ancient communities like the Essenes. He spoke of a family whose existence was deliberately silenced because it risked shaking the very foundations of institutional faith. Stay with me until the end, because as this narrative unfolds, you may find yourself questioning how much of history was hidden to preserve a controlled version of Christ. Think about it. If Jesus truly came from a family chosen and prepared for ages, what does that say about Mary, about Joseph, about the brothers and cousins who may have walked beside him? Could it be that each one of them carried an invisible role, a sacred duty woven into the fabric of a mission designed to transform humanity? This is where Cayce's revelations become both bold and unsettling. He suggested that the Son of God was not placed in the world by random chance, but through a divine lineage that preserved cosmic secrets across generations. The Church, fearful of losing authority, preferred silence. But silence only deepens the mystery, and mystery begs to be unveiled. Has this ever happened to you, when you hear a version of a story so different from what you've always been told, and suddenly it feels as though a veil is being lifted? That is precisely what happens when we look at Cayce's century-old secret. He invites us to see Jesus not as distant, but as profoundly connected to family, to community, to a spiritual current that still flows today. Instead of diminishing the figure of Christ, this perspective humanizes him, reminding us that even divinity can be expressed through bonds of blood, love, and human struggle. It's a narrative that makes him closer, more relatable, and even more inspiring. Cayce's vision paints a portrait of Jesus supported by an unseen current of souls, not a lonely savior standing apart, but a man whose destiny was nurtured, tested, and reinforced by those around him. This hidden family carried energies, knowledge, and sacrifices that formed the soil in which Christ's mission could flourish. And if this is true, then the image of an isolated Messiah is not only incomplete, it is misleading. What else, then, has been withheld? What other truths are waiting in the shadows, ready to change the way we see spirituality? What you're about to hear is not just another historical curiosity. It's a revelation that bridges the divine and the human, showing that faith does not exist in isolation, but thrives in networks, in families, in communities that share a higher calling. Stay with me, because in the next part we'll step even deeper into Cayce's extraordinary vision and uncover the first hidden threads of this forbidden family, a truth that may forever reshape the way you see Jesus. If these insights resonate with you and you'd like to keep uncovering more hidden truths together, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next revelation. Edgar Cayce's vision takes us to a place that feels almost impossible to grasp with the rational mind. He spoke of Jesus' mission as something that did not begin in the modest home of Mary and Joseph, nor even in the prophecies that preceded his birth, but as part of a larger design stretching back through ages of time. According to Cayce, Christ was not placed into the world randomly, but within a current of preparation where souls, families, and communities carried threads of responsibility, waiting for the moment when everything would converge. It wasn't just about a child born in Bethlehem. It was about a plan set in motion long before, across lifetimes and lineages, carefully woven so that the world could receive the transformative presence of the Messiah. This perspective redefines the way we understand divine intervention. Instead of a sudden event, detached from the flow of history, Cayce described a continuity, almost like a hidden blueprint guiding human destiny. Imagine the impact of realizing that every choice, every struggle, and every ancestor could have been part of a journey leading to that singular moment when Jesus entered the world. It turns the story from an isolated miracle into a collective mission, one that involved preparation, sacrifice, and alignment across generations. And if that is true, then Jesus' family was not ordinary at all. They were chosen, each carrying a role in this cosmic framework. But such revelations did not come without resistance. Cayce was not a scholar locked away in dusty libraries. He was a man whose words clashed directly with centuries of tradition. Religious authorities and theologians viewed him with suspicion, accusing him of heresy because his visions did not fit into the controlled narrative they had spent centuries building. To claim that Jesus' mission had roots in reincarnation, that his family had hidden functions beyond the gospel accounts, was to break the silence around one of the most carefully guarded mysteries in Christian history. Behind the scenes, what Cayce shared was not simply dismissed as eccentric, it was feared, because truth has a way of shaking the foundations of institutions that rely on unquestioned authority. And yet, despite the accusations, the message endured. Cayce suggested that Jesus' family, from Mary to Joseph and even his possible brothers, were not side characters or passive witnesses. They were participants, each with a task written into their very being. Some were protectors, some were bridges between traditions, others were challenges placed in his path to strengthen the clarity of his mission. This way of seeing transforms the Gospels into more than sacred storytelling. It makes them fragments of a much larger tapestry, one that includes invisible threads of purpose and connection. Think about how this changes our mindset. Instead of seeing Christ as distant, Cayce draws him nearer, into the struggles of family life, into the weight of decisions made at the dinner table, into the reality of being nurtured, challenged, and supported by those closest to him. The hidden truth here is that divinity does not erase humanity but elevates it, showing that the most extraordinary missions are born in the ordinary bonds of family and community. It's a revelation that doesn't weaken the figure of Jesus, but strengthens him, because it shows how even the divine needed a network of love, protection, and challenge to fulfill its purpose. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because what Cayce revealed about these family roles takes us to a completely different way of seeing sacred history. It opens doors to a broader understanding of how transformation unfolds, not as a solitary act, but as a shared journey where every soul plays its part. And as you reflect on this, write in the comments, "This makes sense to me," because acknowledging these hidden connections might be the key to seeing the story of Christ with new eyes. Cayce's description of Jesus tears away the carefully polished image of an isolated figure set apart from the human experience. Instead, he revealed someone immersed in a network of relationships, a man who was guided, supported, and even challenged by those closest to him. This perspective is powerful because it transforms the way we think about spirituality. If the Son of God himself needed the presence of others to fulfill his mission, what does that say about our own journeys? It suggests that no transformation happens in solitude, that every step forward in our lives is shaped by the unseen and visible bonds around us. The hidden truth is that greatness often emerges not from detachment, but from connection. For centuries, the image of a distant Christ has dominated the mindset of believers, creating a gap between the divine and the human, a figure so unattainable that ordinary people could never hope to reflect even a fragment of his essence. Yet Cayce's vision collapses that gap. By showing that Jesus was surrounded by family members and spiritual allies, he becomes not less divine, but more accessible. more present, a living example of how the sacred and the ordinary are deeply intertwined. This shift in perspective has an undeniable impact. It changes faith from something abstract into something lived, reminding us that every decision, every relationship, and every moment of support we offer to one another can carry divine weight. Of course, such a message unsettles institutions that have built authority on the idea of separation. If Jesus walked among us as part of a shared journey, then spirituality is not confined to cathedrals or dogmas. It is lived behind the scenes of everyday life. It flourishes in family bonds, in the courage to face challenges together, and in the subtle ways that people shape and guide one another. That is why Cayce's revelations were seen as dangerous. They were not only about history, they were about reclaiming a truth that shifts power from hierarchy back to the human spirit. The fear was never about theology alone. It was about the impact of people realizing they were closer to the divine than they had been told. The invitation to reflect on this is irresistible. What else has been concealed to preserve the image of a Christ set high above, unreachable and solitary? How many details were intentionally left in silence because they revealed a story too human, too interconnected, to serve the purposes of control? Cayce didn't just give us information, he offered a new mindset, one where faith is no longer about worshiping from a distance, but about embodying the same spirit that moved through a family, a community, a network of souls. This vision doesn't weaken faith, it expands it, allowing it to touch every corner of life. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because once we accept the possibility that the official narrative left out essential truths, we open ourselves to a journey of rediscovery. It's like standing before a canvas, where the brightest colors were deliberately covered, and suddenly those colors begin to emerge again, altering the entire picture. The story of Jesus becomes not a tale of isolation, but of integration, of humanity and divinity flowing together. And when we see him this way, the barriers that kept us apart from the sacred begin to dissolve, inviting us to recognize that same current running through our own lives. If this resonates with you, put down in the comments, "I see the hidden truth," because sometimes acknowledging what was kept in silence is the first step to embracing a much greater story. When Cayce spoke of Jesus not being alone, he wasn't merely referring to the companions who walked with him during his ministry. He revealed something much deeper, almost invisible to the ordinary eye, a vast network of souls, both incarnate and discarnate, who formed a protective and guiding current around him. This hidden circle worked behind the scenes, ensuring that the mission of the Messiah unfolded in harmony with the greater plan. Think of it like an invisible framework. While history shows us the surface of events, beneath it there was an energetic web of support, a spiritual family whose impact was as decisive as any miracle. The idea may feel unsettling, because it removes the image of a solitary Christ standing above humanity, but at the same time it brings him closer to us, reminding us that even the most extraordinary journeys require allies. Within this web of souls, one figure stands out with particular intensity: Mary. Tradition often portrays her as a simple and humble young woman, chosen at random for her purity. Cayce, however, described something far more profound. Mary was not an accidental choice. She was part of a spiritual lineage carefully prepared over generations. Her presence was not only symbolic, it was essential. She carried within her the ancestral heritage of people who, across centuries, held the expectation of the Messiah. This was not just about bloodline but about energy, intention, and consciousness. Her very being resonated with the vibration needed to bring forth the Christ. Seeing Mary in this way changes everything. Instead of being a passive figure, she emerges as an active participant in the divine plan. Her role extended beyond morality into something almost cosmic. She was the bridge between the divine and the human, the vessel through which an ancient current of wisdom flowed into the world. To reduce her to a symbol of submission or purity is to strip away the depth of her mission. What Cayce revealed is that she embodied transformation itself, carrying the imprint of hidden truths that had been preserved and transmitted through generations. This insight has a profound impact on how we understand the sacred narrative. It forces us to ask what other details have been silenced to maintain a simplified version of the story. If Mary herself was a guardian of ancestral wisdom, then the story of Jesus is inseparable from the legacy of those who came before him. It becomes a journey not of isolation but of continuity, a tapestry of decisions, sacrifices, and revelations passed down until the right moment emerged. It reminds us that destiny is rarely sudden. It is built through layers of preparation, much like the hidden work that shapes any great transformation. Mary's role was not only to give birth, but to anchor the energy of generations into the present. Cayce's perspective shows us a woman who consciously carried the weight of a mission, someone whose mindset and spirit were aligned with forces far greater than herself. This is not a story of chance. It is the story of a carefully guided process that transcends a single lifetime. To imagine her simply as a passive vessel is to overlook the depth of her participation. The hidden truth is that she was part of a sacred network designed to sustain the arrival of a force that would alter the course of humanity. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because when we recognize Mary as more than a symbol, as someone who carried within her an energetic and divine heritage, we begin to see the family of Jesus with new eyes. We see a network that wasn't random but intentional, a lineage where every detail mattered, and where the presence of each soul shaped the path of a mission larger than themselves. And as you reflect on this, write in the comments, "I feel the connection," because acknowledging Mary's hidden role may be the key to understanding how the divine truly works through human history. Cayce's revelations about Mary invite us to look far beyond the image of a modest girl chosen in silence. He described her as someone deeply connected to spiritual schools of her time, particularly the Essenes, a community dedicated to preserving sacred wisdom and preparing souls for extraordinary missions. This connection suggests that her role was not accidental. She was shaped, educated, and guided from an early age so she could consciously fulfill a task that was much greater than herself. Imagine the weight of that preparation, knowing that her life was part of a journey designed to anchor divine energy into the world. It shifts the narrative from passivity to purpose, from chance to destiny. The Essenes were not just a religious sect lost in history. They were guardians of hidden truths, living in seclusion to preserve practices of meditation, healing, and purity. Cayce's vision places Mary within their circle, meaning that even before carrying Jesus in her womb, she was already aligned with a spiritual current that anticipated the arrival of the Messiah. This reframes the entire mindset we often adopt about divine intervention. The birth of Christ was not merely a miraculous interruption in time. It was the result of a long, carefully designed preparation, with decisions, rituals, and teachings that ensured the womb chosen for him carried the right vibration. Behind the scenes, generations had been shaping that moment, waiting for the alignment of both spirit and matter. To think of Mary this way is to recognize her as an active player in the transformation of humanity. She was not chosen only for moral purity, but for her conscious alignment with the divine plan. Cayce portrayed her as a woman who embodied energy, heritage, and spiritual strength, someone who held within herself the culmination of countless revelations. This perspective gives us a profound insight. The extraordinary is rarely born out of randomness. It requires preparation, awareness, and the courage to carry something beyond comprehension. Mary's life was not simply a matter of obedience. It was a conscious journey, a willingness to step into the unknown and become the bridge between heaven and earth. What makes this hidden truth even more striking is how it reshapes the way we see the Incarnation itself. Instead of being portrayed as a supernatural event detached from history, it becomes a moment embedded in a much larger story, one that involved entire communities dedicating themselves to preserving sacred knowledge. The Essenes, through their discipline and devotion, were not just bystanders. They were participants who created the conditions for Christ's birth. Their role was erased or minimized in official tradition because it diluted the image of a purely miraculous conception. But Cayce's revelations bring it back into the light, showing us that divine intervention is often woven through the choices and sacrifices of many, not just the actions of a few. This understanding has a deep impact on the way we think about our own lives. If even the arrival of the Messiah was the result of preparation, lineage, and collective purpose, then perhaps our journeys, too, are guided by currents we cannot always see. The transformation we long for does not simply fall from the sky. It is cultivated, step by step, through decisions, discipline, and the hidden support of those who came before us. Mary's story reminds us that no mission exists in isolation. Her courage, her conscience, preparation, and her spiritual alignment show that being part of a greater plan often requires readiness long before the decisive moment arrives. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because once we accept that Mary was an active participant, shaped by ancient schools and secret communities, we begin to see her not just as a mother, but as a conscious co-creator in the divine journey of Christ. And if that resonates with you, write in the comments, "I believe in preparation," because acknowledging the hidden groundwork behind great transformations is itself a step toward embracing our own role in the unfolding story of humanity. Cayce's revelations about Mary's ancestry push us to imagine a story far richer than the one preserved by tradition. He described her as the culmination of a lineage that reached back to biblical figures who themselves carried sacred responsibilities. This means that the birth of Christ was not simply an isolated event, but the continuation of a thread carefully woven through generations. Each ancestor became part of a larger journey, carrying pieces of wisdom, energy, and purpose that eventually converged in Mary. To recognize this is to understand that history itself was preparing for something extraordinary, and that the choices and sacrifices of those before her had a direct impact on what unfolded in Bethlehem. It is a reminder that transformation never emerges in a vacuum. It is shaped by countless lives behind the scenes. From this broader perspective, Jesus' life begins to look very different. Cayce suggested something that remains controversial even today, that Jesus did not grow up as an only child. He spoke of brothers such as James, Jude, and Simon, whose presence in the household would have created a much more human environment than the solitary image often promoted. This idea challenges the traditional narrative, but it also adds depth. Imagine a young Jesus navigating the same rivalries, affections, and responsibilities that come with siblings. Far from diminishing his divinity, it shows him experiencing the same realities we all face, shaping his mindset and preparing him for the mission ahead. What Cayce unveiled here is a hidden truth that carries profound impact. If Jesus truly had siblings, then his family was larger, more complex, and more dynamic than the simplified accounts suggest. The Church resisted this idea because it blurred the image of exclusivity and threatened the carefully crafted picture of Mary's eternal uniqueness. Yet Cayce's vision insists on restoring that forgotten humanity. In doing so, it places Christ's journey not in a distant realm, but within the living context of a family, where joy and conflict coexist, and where love is tested through daily life. To think of Jesus in this way opens a new door of reflection. It asks us to see the divine not as detached from the ordinary, but as infused within it. His brothers may have been companions, rivals, or even protectors, each playing a role in the hidden preparation of his mission. Their existence suggests that spiritual growth is not cultivated in isolation, but in the friction and warmth of real relationships. Behind the scenes of sacred history lies a household full of laughter, arguments, decisions, and shared responsibilities. The same elements that shape every human being. And perhaps that is where the real transformation of this narrative lies. By accepting that Jesus lived within a family like ours, we begin to realize that spirituality is not about escaping human experience, but about embracing it fully. The rivalries he may have faced, the bonds of brotherhood, the lessons learned through conflict and reconciliation, all of it becomes part of a sacred preparation. It is not the absence of struggle that defines the divine journey, but the way those struggles are transformed into strength, compassion, and wisdom. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because once we allow ourselves to see Jesus within a real family, the figure of Christ no longer feels unreachable. Instead, he becomes a mirror for our own lives, showing that divinity can emerge in the midst of ordinary human bonds. And if this vision resonates with you, write in the comments, "I see the family behind the mission," because recognizing the hidden household of Christ may be the key to understanding how the sacred truly manifests in everyday life. The idea of Jesus having brothers has always carried with it a certain taboo, a shadow cast deliberately by tradition. The Church worked tirelessly to preserve the exclusivity of Mary, to maintain her untouched image, and in doing so, it denied what might have been a far more human reality. Cayce, however, broke through this silence. He revealed that the presence of siblings was not a threat to the sacred story, but a hidden truth that made the mission of Christ even more powerful. By surrounding him with brothers, the divine plan anchored him deeper into human experience, ensuring that his journey unfolded not in isolation, but in the daily fabric of family life. To admit this is to see a transformation in perspective. The extraordinary does not cancel out the ordinary, it emerges from it. Think of what it means for Jesus to have grown up among siblings. Rivalries, laughter, affection, and conflict would have been part of his early formation, just as they are in any household. And in that constant dance of love and friction, the young Jesus would have been tested, challenged, and strengthened. Cayce suggested that this environment acted as a spiritual training ground, preparing him in ways that sermons and scriptures alone could not. It was in the small decisions of family life, in the patience required to live alongside others, that the mindset of the Messiah was shaped. This hidden truth adds an entirely new layer of depth to his story, one that shows divinity not as a removal from human experience, but as its fullest embrace. The impact of this vision is enormous, because it shifts the way we think about preparation for any great mission. It tells us that the home, with all its imperfections, can be a crucible for transformation. Jesus did not rise above humanity by escaping it. He grew within it, experiencing the same tensions and bonds that define us all. Behind the scenes of the gospel accounts lies a family that was not simply present but essential, an environment where his compassion, resilience, and wisdom were forged. And if this is true, then his brothers were not a threat to his uniqueness, but part of the sacred training that enabled him to embody the role he would later play. Among these figures, one name stands out with remarkable weight: James. Often left in the margins of official history, he emerges in apocryphal writings as a leader who carried forward the message after the crucifixion. Some accounts even describe him as James the Just, guiding communities with integrity and courage during a time of uncertainty. But as Cayce highlighted, Rome and the growing church sought to erase or minimize his presence, redirecting authority toward Peter and the structures that would serve institutional power. This decision was not a matter of faith alone. It was politics, an effort to control the narrative and centralize influence. The hidden truth is that James may have been the bridge between the family of Christ and the emerging movement, a figure deliberately silenced so the official story could remain unchallenged. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because when we recover the figure of James and acknowledge the family as a place of spiritual preparation, the entire narrative of Christianity begins to look different. It becomes not a story of one man isolated from the world, but of a network of lives that shaped, supported, and continued the mission long after his physical presence ended. And as you let this sink in, write in the comments, "I see the hidden lineage," because recognizing the forgotten role of family may be the key to unlocking a truer understanding of the journey that changed history. Cayce's insights remind us that spirituality is not something detached from the everyday, but something that flourishes precisely within ordinary bonds. The home, with all its imperfections, its laughter, its arguments, and its small daily decisions, becomes the soil in which divine missions are nurtured. This is a hidden truth that changes everything. The extraordinary is not meant to float above life, but to grow from within it. Jesus' story, when seen through this lens, reveals how the sacred works through the most human of settings: family is not a distraction from destiny. It is the place where the deepest lessons of patience, compassion, and resilience are learned. And it was in this environment that Christ's early life took shape, preparing him for the mission that would transform the world. Within this sacred household, Joseph emerges in a completely new light. Tradition often reduces him to a silent figure in the background, a humble carpenter whose only task was to provide a roof and food. Cayce, however, painted a very different picture. He revealed Joseph as a spiritual guardian, a man chosen not merely for practical reasons, but because his very being carried the vibration required to sustain Mary and the child she bore. Far from incidental, Joseph was an essential part of the divine plan, holding together the earthly conditions so that the heavenly purpose could take root. His presence was not passive, it was conscious, protective, and infused with meaning. The wisdom Joseph carried was no accident. Cayce described him as someone who inherited ancestral knowledge, fragments of traditions that reached back through time. These weren't just skills passed from father to son in a family trade. They were currents of understanding that allowed him to perceive, at least in part, the magnitude of the task entrusted to him. To be the earthly father of the Messiah required more than labor with wood and tools. It required a mindset prepared for sacrifice, decisions anchored in courage, and a faith strong enough to hold steady when nothing around him made sense. This is why Joseph's figure is so striking when restored to its rightful place in the story. He was not merely there to provide, he was there to guard, to sustain, and to protect the fragile unfolding of a destiny that would change humanity. Behind the scenes, his role was as vital as Mary's. If she embodied the lineage and the energetic preparation for the birth, Joseph embodied the shield, the grounding presence that ensured the mission could grow safely. His spiritual task was to maintain balance, to create harmony in the home, and to silently carry the weight of a responsibility few could comprehend. Think of the impact of this revelation. The divine plan did not bypass the need for protection, stability, and wisdom in the ordinary sense. Instead, it required those very elements, showing us that the most sacred journeys are always intertwined with human strength and devotion. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic because when we begin to see Joseph not as a silent shadow, but as a conscious guardian, the story of the Holy Family transforms into a powerful example of partnership and shared purpose. And as you let this image expand in your mind, write in the comments, "I honor the hidden guardian," because recognizing Joseph's wisdom and role reveals a truth long overlooked, one that makes the sacred story far more human and far more profound. When we look at Joseph through Cayce's eyes, the story shifts dramatically. He was not a background figure moving quietly through Scripture, but the guardian of a mission so immense, it required absolute faith and resilience. Joseph's role was to ensure that the divine plan could take root on solid ground. He embodied the very essence of universal fatherhood, the archetype of protection and balance that every great journey demands. It was not just about providing food and shelter, it was about creating a safe space where destiny could unfold. His decisions, his sacrifices, his quiet strength were part of the hidden scaffolding holding up the most transformative story in human history. Without him, the fragile beginnings of Christ's life might not have survived the storms of doubt, danger, and persecution. And yet, tradition often veiled Joseph's role, reducing him to the silent carpenter, almost invisible beside the radiant figures of Mary and Jesus. By emphasizing the miraculous, the narrative left little space to honor the necessary support that made those miracles possible. Cayce, however, pulled back the curtain to show that even the divine requires human cooperation, that even the extraordinary depends on the dedication of those who serve behind the scenes. This hidden truth carries an impact that reaches far beyond history. It reminds us that the quiet strength of those who protect, nurture, and sustain often shapes the outcome of the greatest transformations. Their work may not be celebrated, but without it, nothing stands. And in this web of unseen support, another figure rises into view, John the Baptist. Far more than a prophet crying out in the wilderness, John was a close relative, a thread woven into the same sacred lineage. His task was not secondary, it was foundational. He prepared the way, both spiritually and energetically, shaping the path so that Jesus' mission could be received and understood. To see him as just a messenger is to miss the depth of his connection. Cayce described him as part of the same network of souls, born into the same family current, carrying the same vibration of purpose. John was not standing apart from the story. He was embedded within it, a living bridge that linked prophecy to fulfillment. This perspective changes our mindset about what it means to play a role in a greater plan. Not everyone is meant to be at the center, but every role matters. Joseph's strength at home and John's fiery voice in public were both necessary. Together they show us that divine missions are not carried by one figure alone, but by a constellation of lives, each carrying a spark of responsibility. The hidden truth is that greatness is always collective, and even the most radiant light shines brighter when supported by others. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic because once we recognize John the Baptist as more than a distant prophet, but as family, both in blood and in spirit, the story of Christ expands into a living network of destiny. And if this resonates with you, write in the comments, "I see the hidden bonds," because acknowledging these overlooked connections opens a new way of understanding how the sacred truly moves through history. Cayce's vision becomes even more striking when we look at the bond between John the Baptist and Jesus. They were not only relatives by blood but also companions in spirit, carrying within themselves the same ancestral current, a shared lineage that connected them to a divine circle of purpose. This connection is more than coincidence. It suggests that the preparation for Christ's mission extended far beyond a single household, weaving through branches of family that carried sacred responsibilities. John's fiery call for repentance and his role in baptizing Jesus were not just acts of prophecy. They were the natural unfolding of a shared destiny, a partnership written into their very heritage. It is as if both were born into different roles of the same plan, one to prepare the ground and the other to bring the seed to life. Once we open ourselves to this idea, the presence of an extended family with hidden roles begins to emerge with new clarity. Cousins, uncles, and distant relatives were not simply bystanders but active participants, each fulfilling a task that supported the mission. Some carried wisdom, others offered protection, while some may have even posed challenges that refined the strength of the chosen path. It becomes clear that the sacred network surrounding Jesus was far wider than the Gospels reveal. The official story often reduces the narrative to a handful of disciples, but behind the scenes, a whole web of relatives helped sustain the unfolding of events. This hidden truth reframes our understanding of what it means to carry divine responsibility. It was not the burden of one but of many, each playing their part in silence, their names often erased or forgotten. The apocryphal writings shine a faint but vital light on this forgotten network. Texts like the Gospel of James, the Gospel of Thomas, and the Gospel of Philip preserve fragments that confirm the existence of brothers, cousins, and relatives who held a place in Christ's story. These Gospels, though rejected from the official canon, carry the weight of witness. They hint at a reality where the family of Jesus was not an incidental detail, but a core part of his mission. By silencing these accounts, tradition preserved the image of an isolated Savior, but robbed us of the richer, more human truth, that Christ's life was deeply entangled with a community of relatives, all woven into the sacred journey. The impact of recovering these voices is profound because it broadens the story, transforming it from a tale of one man into the story of a family chosen across generations. To consider this perspective is to confront the hidden decisions made by history, the mindset of leaders who chose control over complexity, clarity over depth. Yet Cayce's revelations invite us to see beyond the veil, to acknowledge that divinity often works through networks of souls rather than isolated miracles. This has a powerful impact on our own journey as well, reminding us that we too are shaped not only by our individual choices, but by the bonds and inheritances that surround us. The sacred is never as distant as it seems. It is rooted in family ties, in shared heritage, in the unseen strength of those who came before us. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because once we recognize that Jesus' extended family played active roles in his mission, the apocryphal accounts stop feeling like fragments of forgotten history and start to look like keys unlocking a hidden truth. And if this resonates with you, write in the comments, "I see the wider circle," because acknowledging the sacred roles of the forgotten family allows us to glimpse a reality much larger than the one we've been told. The Essenes emerge in Cayce's revelations as one of the most fascinating and overlooked elements of this hidden history. They were a mystical community, living apart from the mainstream world, cultivating purity and preserving knowledge that reached back through ancient traditions. In their secluded settlements near the Dead Sea, they practiced discipline, healing arts, and meditation, dedicating their lives to preparing the conditions for something extraordinary. According to Cayce, it was within this current of wisdom that both Mary and Jesus were shaped, nurtured, and spiritually prepared. Their presence was not incidental. The Essenes were guardians of a legacy, ensuring that the energy required for the Messiah could be anchored in human form. Without them, the fragile balance between divine plan and earthly reality may never have been sustained. The training Jesus received among them illuminates an entirely new dimension of his youth. Far from being a sudden burst of divine wisdom that appeared without context, his understanding of healing, meditation, and the laws of the divine was cultivated in these communities. Cayce described how he was taught to harmonize body, mind, and spirit, how he learned to channel energy, and how he developed the awareness that would later define his mission. These details, if acknowledged, shift our mindset about Christ. They show us that even the most extraordinary figures are also the result of preparation, discipline, and lived experience. His transformation into a figure of light was not only an act of heaven, but also the outcome of conscious education, intentional practices, and the influence of teachers dedicated to truth. Yet this crucial element of his journey was concealed by tradition. The Church, in its effort to emphasize the uniqueness of Jesus as a purely heavenly figure, minimized or erased the role of the Essenes. To admit that he had been trained, guided, and shaped by a human community was seen as a threat to the narrative of miraculous exclusivity. But this silence is itself revealing, because it shows how much of spirituality has been filtered to fit a controlled version of history. Behind the scenes, the choice to omit the Essenes was not about truth, it was about maintaining power. By erasing their role, the institutions preserved the image of a savior detached from human roots, while Cayce's revelations restore him to a network of wisdom that made his mission possible. This hidden truth has enormous impact. It reframes not only Jesus' life, but the way we see spiritual development in general. If even the Messiah received training, guidance, and preparation, then our own journeys are not defined by sudden miracles, but by the decisions, disciplines, and communities that shape us. It suggests that transformation is a process, cultivated through mindset and intention, often in places away from the eyes of the world. The Essenes remind us that great missions require both divine inspiration and human dedication, that knowledge is preserved not only through revelation, but through practice, continuity, and faithfulness across generations. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because when we reintroduce the Essenes into the story, the life of Christ stops looking like a detached miracle and begins to reveal itself as a tapestry woven from hidden schools, secret traditions, and collective preparation. And as you reflect on this, write in the comments, "I see the hidden teachers," because recognizing the silent role of the Essenes brings us closer to the truth that wisdom is always preserved, even when history tries to erase it. When we begin to trace the layers of omission and silence, it becomes clear that the story of Christ was not only shaped by revelation, but also by deliberate decisions made centuries later. Cayce's revelations expose the uncomfortable truth that the Church's strategy was never solely about faith, but also about control. By erasing the presence of a large supportive family and downplaying the wider network of relatives, leaders ensured that devotion would flow toward institutions rather than toward a lineage. This wasn't just about theology, it was about centralizing power. The hidden truth here is unsettling, because it reminds us that history is never neutral. What we inherit as sacred narrative is often filtered, adjusted, and reshaped to serve the purposes of those who claimed authority. The fear behind this silence was rooted in politics as much as in faith. If it became widely known that Jesus' mission was intertwined with his family, with brothers, cousins, and extended kin who played active roles, then faith could have taken on a different direction. Authority might have naturally gravitated toward those who carried the same bloodline, creating a system where leadership was inherited, rather than controlled by institutions. The impact of this possibility was so great that the safest decision was to deny it altogether. In doing so, the Church protected its position, but at the cost of burying an essential part of the sacred story. It created a Christ removed from his humanity, distant from family ties, and therefore easier to present as an exceptional figure belonging exclusively to the guardians of doctrine. What Cayce invites us to see is the transformation that occurs when these silences are broken. Instead of an isolated Savior placed above humanity, we discover a man who was deeply connected, supported, and even challenged by those around him. The forbidden family was not a threat to his mission. It was part of the mission itself. But in the eyes of those who shaped official history, acknowledging this family circle would blur the image of exclusivity, making Christ appear less exceptional and more accessible. That accessibility, however, is precisely what makes the story so transformative. It reminds us that divinity manifests not only in miracles, but also in relationships, in shared journeys, in the behind-the-scenes support that rarely gets recognition. This perspective carries with it a profound impact on the way we interpret both history and spirituality. By presenting Jesus as detached from his human ties, the official narrative created a distance that reinforced institutional control. But by restoring the presence of his family, as Cayce did, we are confronted with a much more intimate and dynamic image of faith. It is no longer about admiring from afar, but about recognizing how the divine works within human bonds. The hidden truth is that the forbidden family was never a danger to Christ's message. It was the very ground upon which it was built. Their erasure was not a spiritual necessity, but a political decision, one that reveals more about human ambition than about divine will. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because when we uncover the way power shaped the narrative of Jesus' life, we start to realize how many other revelations might still be buried beneath centuries of silence. And as you reflect on this, write in the comments, "I see beyond the silence," because naming what was hidden is the first step toward reclaiming a fuller, more human, and more transformative story. Cayce's revelations take an even bolder turn when he speaks of reincarnation, describing how Jesus' relatives did not simply fade into history but returned across lifetimes to continue the divine plan. This idea stretches beyond the limits of traditional belief, yet it carries with it a powerful sense of continuity. It suggests that the mission of Christ was never confined to one moment in time, nor to a single generation, but that it rippled forward, carried by souls bound to him through lineage and spirit. Instead of seeing the crucifixion as an end, Cayce invites us to view it as a transition, where those who once walked beside Jesus reappeared in other eras, shaping decisions, guiding transformations, and keeping alive the vibration of the message. Behind the scenes of human history, the same souls kept re-emerging, weaving themselves into the fabric of new journeys. This transforms the way we understand legacy. Instead of being a memory sealed in sacred books, the essence of Christ's family becomes a living current, still active, still flowing. Cayce described how even today, scattered across the world, there are souls carrying within them the same energy that once sustained the Messiah. They may not wear robes or hold titles, but in quiet ways, through compassion, courage, or wisdom, they spread the same vibration that began 2,000 years ago. It is a hidden truth that reframes faith, showing that spirituality is not a static inheritance, but a living flame, passed through generations of both blood and spirit. The impact of this realization is profound, because it dissolves the barrier between past and present. Christ's mission is not a story we look back on, but a reality still unfolding through the lives of those who carry it forward. And while these ideas may sound revolutionary, Cayce pointed to evidence hidden in plain sight. Scriptures themselves, when read with open eyes, contain clues about this wider reality. The apocryphal writings speak of brothers, cousins, and disciples who carried on the work after Jesus' departure, while the Dead Sea Scrolls preserve practices of the Essenes that resonate deeply with the preparation Cayce described. Even the canonical Gospels hint at connections that tradition later softened or erased, such as references to James and Jude as brothers. It is as though the truth was never entirely destroyed, only scattered, waiting for those willing to search beyond the surface. These fragments, once pieced together, form a picture far larger than the official story, confirming that the family and followers of Christ carried responsibilities that extended across lifetimes. This perspective also challenges the way we think about our own journeys. If souls can return, if legacies can continue through time, then perhaps our lives, too, are part of something greater than we can see. Transformation is not confined to a single lifetime. It is the accumulation of experiences, decisions, and revelations that stretch beyond the boundaries of one existence. Cayce's vision opens the possibility that each of us is connected to currents far older than we realize, that the choices we make today may echo forward into futures we cannot yet imagine. The forbidden family, in this sense, becomes a symbol not only of Christ's hidden heritage, but of the continuity of the human spirit itself. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because when we recognize that Christ's mission lives on through reincarnation and a living legacy, the fragments of Scripture and hidden texts begin to look less like distant relics, and more like maps pointing us toward an ongoing story. And as you let that idea settle, write in the comments, "The mission continues." Because acknowledging that the divine plan is still unfolding allows us to see ourselves as part of a journey much larger than one lifetime. When we begin to accept Cayce's revelations, faith itself undergoes a profound transformation. No longer is it something handed down to be followed blindly, locked within rigid interpretations and controlled narratives. Instead, it becomes a living search, an open journey that invites us to question, to explore, and to see the hidden truth that tradition often left behind. Faith stops being a passive inheritance and becomes an active mindset, an invitation to engage with the mysteries of life as something that continues to unfold, rather than something frozen in the past. This shift has an enormous impact because it draws us closer to the essence of spirituality, which was never meant to be about control, but about discovery, courage, and personal transformation. Seeing faith this way allows us to understand that the story of Christ is not distant or unreachable. His mission was carried out within a network of relatives, allies, and communities, showing that divine purpose has always worked through families, friendships, and shared bonds. The forbidden family reveals that he was never truly alone, that even the greatest of missions requires the support of others, and that the most extraordinary journeys are woven through the fabric of human connection. This perspective does not diminish the sacred, it deepens it, reminding us that the divine has always moved behind the scenes of ordinary life. It teaches us that the small gestures of loyalty, protection, and love are not separate from spirituality, but the very foundation of it. What Cayce uncovers is a call to look at our own lives differently. If Jesus' mission was sustained by his family and community, then perhaps our own paths are also influenced by the people we are surrounded by, both seen and unseen. The relatives who support us, the friends who challenge us, the mentors who guide us, each one plays a role in shaping the journey we are here to fulfill. Faith, then, is not about removing ourselves from human bonds, but about embracing them, recognizing that transformation happens in relationship. It is within families, both biological and spiritual, that we learn patience, forgiveness, resilience, and the courage to step into our own calling. Behind the silence of history lies a hidden truth, that Jesus' greatness was not an isolated flame, but part of a fire that spread through his lineage and continues to burn in the hearts of those who carry his vibration. To accept this is to move from passive belief into active reflection. It is to realize that faith is not about repeating doctrines, but about perceiving the living connections between the divine and the human. The impact of this realization is liberating, because it invites us to stop seeing ourselves as mere spectators of a sacred drama, and instead as participants in a story still unfolding. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because when we embrace the idea that divine purpose works through families and communities, the forbidden family ceases to be a forgotten footnote and becomes a key to understanding how the sacred truly manifests in the human journey. And as you reflect on this, write in the comments, "Faith is alive in me," because acknowledging that faith is a living search allows us to step closer to the truth that was never meant to be hidden. If you've made it with me all the way to the end, I want to thank you for walking through these hidden truths and reflections together. If this journey brought you clarity or sparked new questions, subscribing to the channel is a simple way to stay connected and keep exploring content that continues to uncover what lies behind the surface. Leave a comment with the phrase, "I'm with you until the end," so I know you were here for the full story. It's always powerful to see how many of us are on this path of discovery together. And if the message resonated, give this video a like, not just as a gesture of support, but as a way of showing that this connection we're building matters. There's a video right here that complements everything we've talked about today. Click and continue with me over there, and let's keep this journey alive.